So what I want to talk about is data analysis, which I guess everybody in the room knows about. Basically, you grab a load of data out of the world, and you bring it all together, you integrate it, you kind of model it, and you kind of get insights out of it. And the domain about which I want to talk tonight is optimizing aid projects and I've chosen Southern Africa. And one of the problems for those guys doing that is they have no way of predicting how their interventions in these economies are going to pan out. Because they use good sense, but basically their thinking is about Western econometric models, which is cash-based. That doesn't work in a place where a family might have 50 different ways of getting access to food and to money. Money does not equal cash in the way that it does here in an African village. But a bunch of people that I know, they work for a charity called Evidence for Development, and they've spent decades building a methodology and a way of modeling the economy in an African village or a rural village. Basically, it all works out to assessing what is their access to money. Do they buy crops? They grow crops, they sell them, or they eat them, and also they gather wild food, they eat it, or they sell it, and they do day labor and they get cash for that, or maybe they get food for that, and then maybe somebody in the family lives away and sends money home. So there's a very complex way of working out how people in these villages get their money. But actually, couple of 3 days interviewing them, these guys, they can build that model, complete model of the village, and then you can see exactly where everybody, each family in the village gets their money from. And you see something like that as the curve that always comes out. The poor people at the left-hand side, the less poor people at the right-hand side, and the ones below the line, they're always hungry. It's not that many in this village, thankfully. But the interesting thing is that this model can actually be scaled up. I'm talking about families in village. You can actually apply it to districts by sampling. Here we've got kind of like quintiles across that, and you can see where their money's coming from. And in a country called Malawi, in Southern Africa, they gather this data every year. And in 2005, they had a big problem. The rains were late, the rains were inadequate. They knew the maize crop was going to fail. They didn't know how much it was going to fail. They didn't know where it was going to fail, but they knew it wasn't going to be good. So they built two predictive models based on that data. One said, what happens if the maize yield is down 50%? And what happens if the maize price in the markets goes up 300%? And then they looked at each district with the data and said, what if? And this shows that, in fact, in this particular district, if the maize yield goes down 50%, everybody's a little bit worse off. The poor people, they're very poor people. They're in a bad state, but not too bad. Not that something that can be fixed very easily. But if the maize price in this other district goes up by 300% in the marketplace, the really poor people are completely fucked. They buy maize. They work, they grow, they sell, they go buy maize. That's where their staple is. And in that particular district, they're screwed, right? So what did the Malawi government do? Well, those areas in green, they didn't touch them. The areas in amber, we'll do a bit of this and that, but they shored up the price of maize in the marketplaces, they delivered food. Anybody here heard of the 2005 maize famine in Malawi? No, never happened. They dealt with it. They dealt with it themselves, and it cost nothing because they had the data. What if you had that data of the whole of Southern Africa? Well, actually, you kind of do. There's some gaps. It's not kept up to date. It's a bit scrappy in some places, but there's a big will, and there's an increasing recognition by governments in the region that, wow, we could do something with this. So this got me thinking, but other people thinking, what happens if we overlaid this with climate data? So we knew how the weather was affecting the yields and was affecting the prices. Oh, hang on, we better put in market data as well. So we know prices in the markets across the region. We know what the weather looks like. We know how people are getting access to the food, what they're growing and what they're eating and what they're selling and what they're buying. And then maybe, oh, hang on, we'll do this every year. Yeah, and over a period of years, do you know what you got? You've got a database from which you could build a predictive model of how climate change is affecting Southern Africa. How cool is that? And you've got governments, and you've got aid agencies, and you've got academics in universities, and they are beginning to recognize this. So you could then predict the changes. You could find the best practices. You could replicate those best practices as the climate changes. So if we can get all of these people on board, let's say the organization I work with, Evidence for Development, is just a small cog in this wheel of all of these people, and we can train economists. There's economists coming out of universities who know how to do this right now universities in the region. You don't have to fly in Western consultants, and developers building software to support this. And that's all I wanted to say. What a cool idea if big data wasn't just snake oil. It wasn't even just a way for us to make money. It was something that would do some good for the world. Thank you very much.